Hey y'all, howdy. Welcome to One for the Books. I'm Sandra Broadwell and happy Pride Month. I thought this would be a fun video to do because I've read, I think 26 books, if I counted correctly, over the last 2 years that had some great LGBTQ plus representation. So I just want to share those with you guys in case you are looking for these sorts of books in the fantasy, sci-fi, speculative world. I have all my notes here and I'm going to be letting you guys know whether the LGBTQ plus recommendation comes in from the main character or side characters. Mostly it's main characters. And then whether it is a generally happy or tragic arc, if there is a romance involved. I know some people definitely don't want to read the tragic endings when they're looking for themselves represented in a book. So I totally understand that. So I'll be letting you know. If you consider that a spoiler, sorry, maybe this isn't the video for you. Let's dive in. We're going to kick it off with our sapphic recommendations. So starting off, we have the Burning Kingdoms Trilogy by Tasha Suri. And this starts with The Jasmine Throne. This is a fantasy trilogy that I absolutely love. The world building is super cool. It's like inspired by India. There's a lot of political intrigue and just really cool kind of plant magic. As to whether it is happy or tragic, I am uncertain because the trilogy has not finished yet. I've only read the first 2 books. The final book in this trilogy comes out, I believe, towards the end of this year. So yet to be seen, but it's a really, really awesome story so far. Then a standalone fantasy recommendation is When Women Were Dragons, and this is a happy ending. This is a kind of alternate history in which some women have the ability to turn into dragons, and it follows a young woman whose aunt turns into a dragon and just like the trajectory of her life as she tries to uncover why this is happening. This wasn't a favorite of mine, but I still thought I would throw it into the list because I'm sure it has its audience out there. Number 3 is The Deep. This is another main character sapphic story. It does have a happy ending and it is a standalone, I think it's a novella or maybe just a very short novel, but this is about pregnant Africans who were thrown overboard during the Middle Passage, and basically they turn into mermaid-like creatures, and it's about the society that develops from these African descended mermaids. Very interesting, really heartbreaking story, but again, for the main character and the romance, it is a happy ending. Number 4 is Chain Gang All-Stars. This is our first sci-fi recommendation. It is a dystopian novel about a gladiator style entertainment complex that springs up around the American prison system. And so the prisoners actually basically fight to the death to try and win their own freedom. This is a tragedy, but it was super cool. The whole book felt like reading a reality TV show, basically. Number 5 is another sci-fi recommendation, and that is The Carls by Hank Green. This is a sci-fi duology and does have a happy ending by the end of the 2-book series. This one is about a mysterious kind of alien robot that shows up on Earth and how it completely upends society, but specifically one young woman's life, because she is the first person to talk about the statue that she finds on the internet. Number 6 is Legends and Lattes by Travis Baldree. This is a really cute, cozy fantasy about an orc who opens a coffee shop and it's very low stakes plot, but it's very sweet. This is a single kind of standalone book, but there's also a prequel involving the same character. Both of them are very happy. Number 7 is another fantasy called A Master of Djinn by P. Jelly Clark, and this is about a lady detective in kind of an early 1900s steampunk version of Egypt, and it has some djinn characters which are very cool. This was a really fun read and it is a happy ending. Number 8 is the Masquerade Trilogy by Seth Dickinson. This is a story about a woman named Baru Cormorant whose homeland is taken over basically by like an evil empire, and she dedicates her life to infiltrating the empire from the inside and taking it down, basically. And she is an accountant when she grows up, and It has tons of political intrigue. There's really like a lot of great things to say about the series, but I ended up kind of losing interest in it by the time I got to the third book, so I never finished it. But I will say the sapphic elements of it are very tragic. Number 9 is another sci-fi. That is This Is How You Lose the Time War by Amal El-Mohtar and Max Gladstone. This is a really cool short novella involving a time war between two different factions. They're both trying to control basically the timeline, and it is an epistolary format, meaning the characters are leaving letters to each other, and that's kind of the way the whole thing is told. And in this one, again, the two characters are on opposing sides of this war, and the letters start out being really taunting, like rubbing in their victories in each other's faces, but through these letters, they slowly get to learn like what it's like to be on the other side of the war, and that humanizes them. And then obviously things develop from there. And this one is happy and also very sweet and lovely. One of my top recommendations from this entire list. Number 10 is She Who Became the Sun by Shelley Chan Parker. The author of this series is non-binary, I believe, but the main character is sapphic. I enjoyed the first book, but didn't really feel like continuing in the series, so I can't really say whether it has a happy or tragic ending as far as the characters are involved. But at least at the end of the first book, it was still leaning in a happy direction. But this is an Asian-inspired fantasy about a young woman whose brother is told that his fate is to become great, and she gets her fortune told by the same fortune teller, and he tells her basically that her fate is nothing. And then her brother soon after that dies, and so she decides to pretend to be her brother in order to have his great fate. And just the way that that shapes her life as she gets involved with these international conflicts and politics. Number 11 is The Final Strife by Sara El-Arifi. This is a BIPOC sapphic romance fantasy, and this has a really cool setup of people in this world have different colored blood, and what color your blood is determines kind of like what caste you are in society, and it's about a rebellion against kind of the upper echelon of society from these oppressed peoples. I liked the plot of this story, and I thought that the romance was really sweet and cool, but the writing style just wasn't for me, so I haven't continued with the series. So I can't tell you again whether this is a happy or a tragic ending for the characters involved, but definitely give it a shot if you're looking for like a new adult fantasy trilogy. Number 12 is The Space Between Worlds, and this is by Micaiah Johnson. This is a sci-fi standalone story that has a happy ending, and it is about a young woman who grows up in the kind of neglected, shunned part of society, but she wants to live in this like gleaming white city where there are lots more opportunities, and she has a job where she travels between parallel worlds. There's really a lot that goes into this story. I thought it was very, very cool, and again, another happy ending. Number 13, we're back to fantasy with The Once and Future Witches by Alex E. Harrow. This has 3 main characters. They are sisters, and one of the main characters is in a sapphic romance that ends happily. This is also an interracial relationship, and this story is about basically the intertwining of like if the suffragist movement also had witches. And I absolutely loved the characters. I thought Alex E. Harrow's writing was super beautiful. So if you are into witchy vibes, this is definitely my top recommendation for that. Number 14 is Carmilla. This is considered like the first vampire story. This supposedly inspired Bram Stoker to write Dracula. This one does involve the main character, but the sapphic parts of it are very understated. You really, I think, have to read between the lines. It's not as overt. Most people do consider this kind of like a classic kind of sapphic story, but again, it's very understated and it is tragic. But it's very kind of moody, less plot, more vibes type of read. Number 15 is Lone Women, and this is our first one that doesn't involve the main character, but there is both a lesbian couple that are important side characters, and there is also a trans character in this story. And they all have important parts to play in the plot, even though they are not the main character. Lone Women is a horror. It is really interesting because it's kind of a historical horror. It's about a woman who is fleeing from a tragic secret, and she becomes a homesteader in Montana to kind of get away from her past, and she has this mysterious trunk that she drags around with her everywhere, and you don't know what's inside the trunk, but it's obviously something horrifying. So that was a really fun read, and it does have a happy ending for our LGBTQ plus characters. Number 16 is The Great Cities Duology, and this is by N.K. Jemisin. This is our first that has gay characters. Gay as in male characters. This one is kind of a sci fantasy. There are, I would say, like 5 different main characters. There isn't like a main character, but one of the 5 is gay, and by the end of the duology does have a very happy ending. This is a really cool story about an alien that's trying to take over New York City, basically through means of like gentrification and like poor housing policies. I mean, basically like it's an allegory for capitalism, but it's like this eldritch horror alien creature. And as this alien rises in power, so too do these 5 kind of like avatars representing the 5 boroughs of New York. It's very fun. It's very cool. And yeah, I would highly recommend it if you're looking for something that's different than anything else on this list. Number 17 is House in the Cerulean Sea by TJ Klune. This is another male, happy, cozy fantasy. This one is about an orphanage for kind of mutant magical children. And the main character is a like inspector from the government that goes to make sure that these children are being cared after in order to meet government standards, and he falls in love with the person who runs the orphanage. It's very sweet. Children are very cute. This one was a little bit like too sugary sweet for me, almost like reading a Hallmark movie, but if you're looking for that sort of like cozy, just heartwarming vibes, I highly recommend this one. Number 18 is Song of Achilles, and this is by Madeline Miller. This is a classic Greek tragedy. It is a retelling of the Iliad from the perspective of Patroclus. So basically, Patroclus and Achilles are lovers. This is another standalone novel. Number 19 is Lark Ascending by Silas House. This is a sci-fi kind of near future dystopian novel with a gay main character, and this one will have you sobbing like within the first 30 pages. I think it is very tragic. The story overall has a happy ending, but the romantic elements do not. But I highly recommend this. This was one of my top reads of 2022. Number 20 is Interview with the Vampire by Anne Rice. This one is another one that I think... Oh yeah? This is another one that I think is very understated. I don't know that they ever explicitly have a romance, but the way that it's written, it's pretty clear, at least to me when I read it, that the main character, Louis, is in love with the vampire Lestat, who is the one who turns him into a vampire. And this ends very tragically for pretty much everyone involved. But it's a great like slow burn character study if you're looking for a good horror novel. Then we have a couple in a row that involve side characters, not the main character, but The Adventures of Amina Al-Sirafi by Shannon Chakraborty is a really fun pirate story about a older lady pirate. I think she's in her 40s, and it's kind of a get the band back together for one last mission type of thing, and one of her crewmates is gay. Only the first book in the series is out so far, but the side character who is gay, at least thus far in the story, has a very sweet relationship. I just thought that was really cute. Number 22 is The Dandelion Dynasty by Ken Liu. This is an Asian-inspired fantasy, and it has a gay side character. I have not finished the series yet. I'm only on book 2 out of 4, so I don't know for sure yet how it's going to end, like happy or tragic. But thus far, the character who was gay was very, very minor in book 1, but they've had a larger role thus far in book 2, and it's been very sweet. Number 23 is The Broken Earth Trilogy by N.K. Jemisin. This has some side characters that are gay and trans, and also has some polyamory representation. I read this, I think, 2 years ago, and I honestly can't remember how all the storylines for all those different characters turns out. There are definitely some tragic elements to the story. I think the trilogy overall has a pretty happy ending, but if you're looking for happy or tragedy for those characters in particular, I honestly can't remember. But this is a really great trilogy. It is a fantasy about a world that goes through basically like world-ending apocalypses every few years, and they call them the seasons. And the Earth is just very like geologically unstable, and there are some characters who can kind of control earthquakes and things. It's really, really neat. But the main story centers a woman who has hidden her abilities from her husband, and when he finds out, he kidnaps their child. So the main elements of the story are about her trying to track down her child and rescue her from her husband. But a really, really great trilogy. Okay, closing in on the end, these last three are non-binary characters. So number 24 is the Singing Hills cycle. This is actually a fantasy novella series, Asian inspired, and the main character is a cleric named Chi, who is non-binary. Because they are a cleric, there's like no romance involved, at least in the first 5 books that are out so far. I think there's a plan to be like 8 or 10 novellas in the series eventually, but thus far there's nothing tragic. It's just cool stories about this cleric who goes around and collects stories for their histories, and the world is just really fascinating, and cleric meets lots of interesting people. So this has been a really fun one for me to read. I just caught up on the series this month. Number 25 is What Moves the Dead, which is a retelling of Edgar Allan Poe's The Fall of the House of Usher. I really loved this story, and the main character is non-binary. A second book in this series came out this year, which I have not read yet, but at least in the first book there was like really no romantic elements, and so there was no like happy tragedy spectrum to go off of, but it is a horror story. And finally, number 26 is Black Sun by Rebecca Roanhorse. This is the Between Earth and Sky trilogy. I believe the third and final book in this trilogy comes out this month, so I have not read it yet, so I can't say again where we're ending on the happy tragic spectrum. But this one is not the main character. This is a fantasy based on Native American cultures in like a pre-Columbian era America, and a lot of Native American cultures have like a whole different pronoun for non-binary people, that is just an accepted third gender, and so they do have that representation in the book. I don't believe there was a romance involving that character, but I just thought that whole aspect of it being built into the culture was really, really cool. But the story of Black Sun is about the reincarnation of the crow god, and how that kind of upends all of the religion and society of these various tribes across the land and starts some really serious stuff happening. The whole first book is like a countdown to this eclipse when the crow god will be reborn, and it is so exciting and just a really, really thrilling read, and I can't wait to read the third and final book that comes out, I believe, this month. That's it for the 25 plus, I think it was 26, Pride Month speculative recommendations. There are definitely more out there. These, again, are just the ones that I personally have read over the last 2 years or so. If you have additional fantasy, sci-fi, or horror LGBTQ plus recommendations, I would love to hear about them down in the comments below. Or if you've read any of the books on this list, let me know what your favorite one was. Thanks so much for tuning in and hanging out with me a little bit today. As always, please be kind, read books, and hit the subscribe button below for more bookish content to come. Happy Pride Month.